Hey YouTube, Todd here. Today we are putting an LS7 clutch kit into a 2004 Cadillac CTS-V Series. The first thing that I noticed after the installation is the clutch is lighter on the pedal, the engine starts and stops faster, and the engine revs up and down faster. This is due to the fact that the new flywheel is about half as massive as the OEM flywheel. I can't say this translates to horsepower at the wheel, but I can say the car feels more nimble and that I wish I had done this a long time ago. This video is sponsored in part by Lindsay Cadillac. Now, I've been servicing and maintaining this car for over a decade, and I've found that Luke and his crew at Lindsay Cadillac, they know their shit when it comes to this car. I've left a link in the description to contact Lindsay Cadillac for parts and information. Right here I've got a lineup of all the tools that I used. What's not shown here is the transmission jack and the remote line bleeder. And note that this project was a royal pain in the ass, so I had to use a lot more caffeine than normal. A quick run through of the task at hand. First, jack the car up, pull the exhaust off, disconnect the drive shaft, disconnect all the wires, remove the bolts that run all the way around the transmission. You'll have to disconnect this clutch line. Once the transmission is disconnected from the bell housing and the lines are all separated, everything's disconnected, you're going to need a transmission jack to hold it up into place, and you can slide it back a little bit. Once you slide it back, you can drop it down out of the car, and from that point the transmission will be out, but the clutch will still be inside of the bell housing right here. Once the transmission is removed, then you've got a bunch of 13mm bolts bolted to the engine block. Disconnect those, and it's going to be a son of a bitch because there's so much in the way that you can't really get to this. You've got to disconnect the exhaust, the hangers. We're going to remove the back part of the drive shaft. This is a 5/16 Allen. Alright, now that the rear of the drive shaft is disconnected, it spins freely. Now we go to the front of the drive shaft, and these are 18mm. Disconnect this carrier bearing in the center and the whole drive shaft will come out. This is a 15mm. Once everything is disconnected, the drive shaft is probably going to fall right on my forehead, crack my skull open. We're going to try to avoid that. To get the shifter off, put it in reverse, and then twist and pry up, and it'll come up, and voila, now you've got access to the inside, and you can pull out the old supervisor's here. Says, hey, get to work, man.
Hey, look. Bunk.
Bunk. Now we can pull the insulation out, and there will be access. Now we're going to be pulling all of these out. Those are all 10mm. Now that the shifter is disconnected from the top, make sure we disconnect all the wires from the transmission. So we've got the transmission jack in place. It's going to be supporting the transmission as we remove the transmission cross brace, which is this big honker. Alright, this is a T47. Holy balls. Holy balls.
Oh, balls. No. Oh, balls. Oh, balls! Yeah. Oh, balls! Oh, balls!
Oh, balls! Yeah, Dad could be using swear words to help him out here, but he's using oh balls. And then we got a little repeater. Here we're going to disconnect the shifter linkage. This is a 13 millimeter nut and a 5 millimeter Allen. Those two bolts are out. You can slide the shifter up and bam, shifter's out. Now there are 8 15 millimeter bolts that are going to be all around it, and we're going to start at the ones that are most accessible right here. Now we're going to lower the transmission a little bit so we can access those top bolts. Okay, now that the transmission's lowered a little bit, we can more easily access these remaining 4 bolts, 15 millimeter bolts. And what we're going to do is you'll reach around with a long extension. Now that all the 8 15 millimeter bolts have been removed from around the transmission, you can see it's starting to separate. The transmission is separating from the bell housing. So to access that top bolt on the bell housing, we've got to take off this, and then we can actually feel it back here. So I'm going to pull the cross brace off and the motor cover. Now I should be able to reach that, be able to get a 13 millimeter wrench on that now from up here. We're going to go around here and take these off. These are 13 millimeter. Now we're going to start pulling these guys off. These are 15 millimeter. This is a heavy turd. Now we've got the new slave cylinder on with this LS7 clutch kit. It does not fit perfectly right here, so we're going to have to notch. You can see we're going to have to notch this out right here. Now you can see that's the notch that was made right there. There we go. Yeah, this is your mobile wheel. I run it in part. I run it in part. Since we've got the transmission and the flywheel, everything off, we're going to remove and replace this rear main seal. We've got our new one. Make sure it's oriented right, and we just tap it in with a block of wood and a hammer. You can get it started with your hand. Now we've got a new rear main seal. Now we're ready for the flywheel. gonna sit up in there. Make sure you line up that hole there. That's an alignment hole. I like to put a little thread locker on them, the removable kind. So next we're gonna torque these down in a very specific pattern. The first time we go through it, we're gonna torque it at 15 in a star pattern. So we're gonna go 15, 15, 15, 15, 15, 15. And then we're gonna run through it again and go 37, 37, 37, 37, 37, 37. And then the final run is going to be 74 foot-pounds. So 74, 74, 74, 74, 74, and 74. And you want to torque it in a star pattern so that it seats itself nice and proper. To prevent the flywheel from spinning, I just put a small socket right there. All right, now we are going to install the clutch disc and the pressure plate. I like to put a little bit of thread lock on the bolts. So now that the pressure plate is on, we want to draw it in as evenly as possible. So we're going to torque it down in 3 different passes in a star pattern again. And the first run is going to be 20, and then 40, and then the final pass will be 57. So now that the clutch is installed, we can reassemble the rest of the car. We're going to put the bell housing on, attach the transmission, attach the cross brace, all the wires, make all the connections, put the exhaust pack on. Then we're going to have to bleed the clutch sleeve.